listen to PRN with any kind of regularity, you would know Henry Grayson because of his hosting Mindful Living. So he's been on these airwaves really from the beginning. And for those of you who don't know him from PRN, I would be surprised. But you would possibly know him also from his work as a psychologist as well as a minister. And, I know I've heard of you from way back. Do you know that? Way back. And isn't that funny, and I'm not Presbyterian, and I'm not a theologian.
And I haven't been a minister for many decades.
What can I tell you? My mind reaches back to many lifetimes, so therefore, that's it. That's the cue. So, in fact, Dr. Henry Grayson is really an extraordinary, integral thinker as a psychologist with a deep background in spirituality, wisdom, East and West, and has written a number of books. He has played some very important roles in the field of psychotherapy, helping to invent, to innovate, as well as to help to administrate a number of, like the National Institute of Psychotherapies, for instance. You've been on the board there for many years, and you have helped to bring forward a lot of innovative thinking in the field, which the field really has needed. So we really have Henry to thank for a lot of that. In his latest book, Use Your Mind to Heal Use Your Body. That's how accustomed we are to using the mind to heal the body.
As if the whole purpose is to heal the body.
Yeah, right. And you beautifully inverted it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's fine for it to go both ways, but let's make sure that we get this proper inversion.
Exactly, because if we don't use the body, if we don't heal the mind, we're more likely to get sick more often.
Exactly.
And if we use the mind, we can do the healing of what's going on there, and we're more likely to stay in a lot more health and happiness.
Exactly.
And heal more quickly.
What I like about this is the whole notion of radical and revolutionary methods to release all barriers to health, healing, and happiness. This is a kind of language that most people aren't bold enough to use, So, you are again an exception in this domain. And I also very much like this, and I'll say this by way of introduction, combining quantum physics, neurophysiology, worldwide spiritual wisdom, and scientific research. Henry has been able to release the effects of negative beliefs, various types of remembered and unremembered, that's an interesting way of putting it, traumas, and our unconscious downloads, which result in keeping us unhappy and sick. So in this show, you are going to learn about how to really turn all of that up on its head and create healthy thoughts and maintain them. That's the trick. Not just having them, but sustaining them over time so they can have the effect on the body, and then inversely for the body to reinforce the healthy thoughts so we become a fully integrated, holistically happy being, if you will. So you make some wonderful claims here also, Henry, which I love. Stop repetitive, destructive, unproductive thoughts. Tell us. I mean, that is a big thing because so many people, you and I are both psychotherapists. We've been dealing in this domain for so long. And to bring some of the wisdom of the spiritual traditions, to bring the wisdom of neuroscience to bear is a new step, a quantum step, if you will, that I adore, and obviously you do too. Well,
I think we need to know that there's no such thing as an idle thought. We've often thought that it's just an idle thought. Why bother with it? We're just having that.
Yeah.
But I think every thought is really an act of creation. It's not so much an observation of a fact, but every thought is an act of creation. Because every time, with every thought I have, it's affecting every cell in my body. Like Candace Pert discovered the way the mind-body connection takes place with the role of the neuropeptides.
Yes.
And that means an instant messaging system in the body. And so when I have a thought, this instant messaging system goes into effect, just like that. And it's affecting, therefore, every cell. And I've discovered one thing you can do just to demonstrate that so easily is if somebody has a negative thought, an angry thought, resentful thought, judging thought, anxious thought, and ask them to hold out their arm and resist me pushing it down as much as they can. Even people who are strong and work out in the gym several times a week, I can push it down with one finger.
Really?
And their minds are just blown.
So you're saying that even idle thoughts have a valence, they have a charge.
Exactly. Exactly. And then
no neutrality.
And the opposite side is if a person thinks a happy thought, a joyous thought, a compassionate, loving thought, then I test the arm. I can push with both hands as hard as I can, and the arm won't budge. I could almost swing from it like a monkey on a limb.
Wow.
And that happens just in a moment of changing thoughts. And if that does it with the musculature and the strength, what does it do to all the other cells?
Exactly. The entire biochemistry shifts. I've said this to so many people so many times. There is a biochemical substrate to every single thought.
Yes.
And feeling.
Yes.
A thought, you could say a feeling is a grosser form of numerous thoughts, or a thought complex, a thought group.
Well, the body chemistry changes with everyone, and maybe it's a change of chemistry that affects the feeling, or it's a change of thought that affects the chemistry, and it's all interwoven together.
Exactly. So how do you use this then in your work with clients? How is it that you take your bountiful knowledge about neuroscience, about kinesiology, and weave it into something that actually makes a difference in people's lives?
Well, I think that a lot of times we can monitor some thoughts, and we can use various exercises to do that. But a lot of times people have trouble doing that. And why do they have trouble doing it? I think it's because they've had a lot of painful experiences in their adult life, in their childhood, maybe even their early childhood that we don't even remember, maybe even in the uterus, maybe genetic memories, maybe what we call past life traumas. All of that combined together creates some kind of a format inside, and it creates a predisposition. And they each have a negative valence for us. And if we don't clear that out, then it's going to be like you're trying to put brakes on a train, going 70 miles an hour, but you've got 4 diesel engines pushing as hard as they can behind that train while you're trying to stop it at the same time. And I think that's what happens with our thoughts. If we've got a whole bunch of other traumas that are not cleared, it's going to keep pushing like several engines. And then out of those traumas, we all draw conclusions from them. We draw negative beliefs about ourselves. Those conclusions gel into beliefs. I'm not good enough, or I have to be perfect, or I'm going to be rejected, or I'm powerless, or I'm going to be a victim, or whatever it is. It goes on and on and on. And every one of those negative thoughts has a negative valence on every part of our bodies. Then they fire up more thoughts to rehearse that. And I found that if people just observe their thoughts for the first hour upon awakening, if they really observe them and make a notation of it, their minds are blown away by how many are negative.
It might be good to blow that mind away.
That's what we'd hope would happen. That's what we'd hope would happen, to blow the old mind.
Exactly.
Exactly right there. Because then they begin to see just that first hour upon awakening, my thoughts and my fears about the day, my remembrance of something negative from yesterday, who somebody rejected me a week ago, how I look when I look in the mirror, or what my clothes are like, or what's going to happen with my boss today, or my mate, said something to me but when we got up that I hated. It's negative thoughts, it's negative chatter.
It's like we're caught, Henry, in this current that is virtually nonstop.
Yeah.
Until we interrupt it.
Exactly.
And we can interrupt it. And I think that's a lot of the power of what you're teaching here.
That's
is
intent.
That there is, as we say in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, a pattern interrupt.
Yes.
Or as Gurdjieff used to talk about, an external shock that would just stop somebody in their tracks using a train image, and that quiets the mind. It works.
Well, I was thinking when you quote Gurdjieff, there's another quote from him that's so apropos here as to why we need this work. He says, he's a Russian philosopher, and for those who don't know it,
yes,
he says you can call on human beings to make noble sacrifices for almost any worthy cause. But he adds a caveat, but just don't ask them to give up their suffering.
Yes, exactly.
Because
there's the whole idea of intentional suffering, however, right, that he brings forward. That's a whole other interesting
we get attached to
conscious suffering. Yeah,
at the ego level.
We do.
And
yes.
the ego level is that part of our mind that lives in the illusion of being separate.
That's right.
And we want to preserve that illusion of separateness, and that makes us feel weak and powerless and victimized, and therefore we suffer.
Exactly. To go back to something that you said is something as a therapist and as a human being I kind of contemplate regularly, and I keep seeing it. And it really brings me back to Dr. Sigmund Freud. And that
we've all heard of him.
And what's interesting is that with all of the new psychotherapies, of which you and I are quite familiar and have helped to innovate, at the same time, his words of early trauma whether, intrauterine or post, i.e. life, is really a significant portion of the formation of personality and the formation of character. And the formation, of course, we would call them the filter system that you were basically referring to, through which, guys, we see the world.
That's the part, I think, where he was one of the places where he was really accurate.
Yeah.
He was accurate that that's the way we formed our attitudes about life, our behaviors, and that these traumas shaped us. And I think he was also accurate in other ways, that now the research shows that 95% of our behaviors are unconscious. Only about 5% are conscious.
The old iceberg image.
Yeah, and I think that he was right about that. That's where he made such a major contribution.
Indeed.
The problem was he did not yet find a way to deal with all that.
Yes.
He thought he tried several methods, and he kept trying others. He tried hypnosis. He tried free association. He tried dream analysis.
Cocaine.
He tried cocaine. And he
Coca leaves, at least.
Tried smoking cigars. But
napping during sessions.
And I think if he had stayed alive, because of his nature to be curious and to be creative and be open-minded, he would have found some other methods.
Yes.
But he didn't in his lifetime.
Yes.
And toward the end of his life, he was looking toward some things that were unacceptable to his followers. The whole idea of extrasensory perception.
Oh, yes.
He started to look at that. Then they said he's the crazy old man.
But was he doing that because of Jung? Or did he start doing that on his own?
Well, he didn't like Jung at that point. They kind of had split ways.
But I think they split because Jung was putting too much pressure on the old boy to think
to come
more
along that way.
Yeah, right. That whole idea, the whole spiritual domain was not Freud's zeitgeist, if you will.
But you're talking about of that same era. Then there was Carl Jung, who said, just as we get enough fed up with our ways, maybe by middle age we might wake up and say, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, right.
There's got to be another dimension.
Yeah. And I feel that Jung helped to expand the psychotherapeutic domain and the how-to create a shift more than Freud. I happen to agree with you completely. Freud's brilliance was in analyzing and coming up with the sequence of events that lead to personality and character formation, either healthily or not healthily. And that is a gift to us.
Well, I think what Jung called a shadow is more what I would think of as the ego. Sigmund Freud tried to give a lot of positive value to the ego, and I think as he defined ego, the only positive piece of it was the part that's kind of can be observing of yourself and have some self-reflection.
Right, witness.
But the rest of the ego, where it says it's the seat of your anxiety and defenses. And he started talking about healthy defenses. And this tradition would talk about the need to develop healthy defenses. But for some reason, even when I was in training to become a psychoanalyst, I thought, that doesn't really make sense after studying psychopathology. Because what I learned from that was the more you use any one of those defenses, the crazier you become. So that doesn't make sense.
But one can understand why one uses defenses.
We use them because we're in pain and we want to find some way out. But the solutions, the ego mind, that part of our minds, which is the illusion of separateness, always offers a solution to the problem that creates more of the problem.
Yes, indeed. That is the loss of footing in that. Exactly. No, I understand. Just as even you said something really interesting when you were talking, Henry, about idle thoughts, and that, you were basically saying that each thought has its charge, its valence. And so in a sense, there's no such thing as a neutral thought. So from that point of view, there's no point of there's no such thing as a pure observation, you were saying. That's kind of interesting because we like to think that we can compartmentalize our thoughts in such ways that now I am just objectively analyzing. But of course, quantum physics lets us know that we are part of the observation. So
there's no separation between observer and observed.
Exactly. So we are always one and with or affecting, influencing what it is we're observing. So what do you say to your clients when it comes to that? You can't just say think positive thoughts, because that's a little just too simplistic at the end of the day.
Well, that's why a lot of people trying that with affirmations and visualization, while those are valuable tools, but a lot of people find they don't work. And why they find they don't work is that those things are fueled by those other engines. They're fueled by that the
Trauma.
traumas that are not clear.
The
They're cleared
subconscious
by the negative
programs.
beliefs. And then what I call downloads, too.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of downloads we bring from early childhood. And I mean by downloads is that in those early years of life, our brain waves are the slowest. When we're first born, those brain waves are in the slowest possible. They're delta brain waves. And for a year and a half, then they change into theta brain waves. And then finally, when we hit to grammar school, they get into alpha brain waves. Well, that's like 3 different hypnotic trances.
Truly.
And finally, we hit adolescence, and we get into beta brain waves, and we think more clearly and objectively and so on.
More what we call conscious.
Yeah. And so what we do is if we're going to practice hypnosis and try to hypnotize somebody to stop smoking, we want to hypnotize them. The reason for that is to slow down the brain waves. As we slow down the brain waves, we make them more susceptible to the suggestion. Oh, you won't be able to tolerate the taste of nicotine or smoke or tobacco or whatever it is. It has more of an effect. But think about it. When we're little kids, that's a state we're living in every day, all the time. And so everything around us, we're just downloading.
Right. The sponge state,
we're
basically.
sponges soaking up exactly all these things our parents did, the way they dealt with problems, the way they dealt with their anxiety, the way they dealt with their fears, the way they dealt with their own self-esteem, the way they dealt with illnesses, the way they dealt with health. All of that we just kind of download and take it in. And so we can't blame ourselves for it. That's part of the human condition. We're all just human, and we're all having to deal with that stuff.
Exactly.
And I say that because so many people start beating themselves up for what they are.
I tell people also that it doesn't belong to them. It's just borrowed. And
That's another way of putting it.
Right. They can either keep it or they can give it back whence it came. Keep the good stuff.
Wrap it up in a package with ribbons on it and hand it back to your parent.
Exactly.
Give this back to you.
Send it off. Thank you so much. And say thank you.
That's a nice image.
Right. Now, I also like to really remind my clients and others that what our parents gave us and grandparents, the whole larger ancestry, are usually incredible gifts of how to be human. And yet there are some that were passed on or downloaded, as you well put it, that sort of like thanks, but thanks anyway.
And who knows how many generations back they came from.
Exactly. So how, from a practical point of view, I want to kind of give the audience something that they could take away with them after today's show, Henry, where they could really get that. Your book is brilliant. I just love, I'm actually, if you don't mind my saying, I feel like you're a kindred spirit with me because
I'm feeling that as we're talking.
You're feeling that, right? It's coming on. It's like, really, I so appreciate your large-mindedness and heartedness, and you're bringing it together in a beautiful confluence and articulating what I feel are common sense, but inspired perspectives that could just help round out people's, number one, love and appreciation of themselves, respect for themselves and for others, and give them also a healthy respect for the subconscious, the way we learn, the way you were just describing it, and then kind of take charge and get into action.
Yeah.
What can you say about that?
Oh, so many different things. My mind went to about 15 things all at once. And I was just thinking that one impromptu study I did kind of turned out to be that.
Yeah.
A number of years ago, I was giving a seminar in Boston, and I had the inspiration as I opened it up to say, how many people here want to have a totally healthy and happy life? And everybody's hand went up.
Oh, that was shocking.
And you read about that.
I did.
Kind of in the early part of the book, because that was part of the inspiration in this book.
Yeah.
And then I said, with your permission, I'd like to use muscle testing from applied kinesiology. And for those who don't know what that is that something developed in the middle of the last century by I guess initially by a chiropractor, and then a physician came along and developed it further.
Sure.
But anyway,
my audience is pretty hip to these
that.
things. Yeah.
So we know that what happens if you make a statement that your inner wisdom knows to be true, your arm becomes strong. If your inner wisdom knows it to be false, it goes weak. And so that way we can get past our self-deception. Because as Friedrich Nietzsche put it, the person we lie to most is ourselves.
Right.
And we do it not because we're bad people and we're liars. It's just because 95% is unconscious. So how could we not lie to ourselves?
That's right.
And so anyway, I asked people this question. Every hand went up, that they totally deserved and was safe to have a totally healthy and happy life. And I said, with your permission, I'd like to come around and quickly test everybody's arm and just see if it's strong or weak on those statements. And it blew my mind as well as theirs. I thought maybe a third of the people might have one or both of those two barriers. And 82% didn't believe it was safe or that they were deserving of having a totally healthy and happy life. And the other 18% had one or the other. And I wasn't sure, is this just New Englanders? And I thought, let me try it. And
maybe it's the clam soup.
I thought, well, that's a possibility. Let me check it out. A few weeks later, I was giving a seminar here in New York, and I got the same response here. And then I tried it in Chicago, and in San Francisco, and in Austin, Texas.
It's Americans.
And in North Carolina. And I realized, okay, it's maybe Americans. Maybe it's more Western. It might even be human.
Yeah, right. Dun, dun, dun.
That maybe it's part of the human condition.
Right.
And so that takes some of the onus off ourselves to not blame ourselves.
Exactly.
That's what I like about that. And what I'd like to say, though, is that those two things, not being worthy or not being safe, not being deserving or safe, are just two of multiple barriers we might have to being happy and healthy or allowing healing to occur.
Sure. Well, you're suggesting this notion that there is a level of subconscious, typically self-sabotage, in our daily lives.
Exactly.
That we strive toward success, but it's like sort of the image you said before, which I use frequently, which is it's like driving with the brakes on. You know, you're trying to go forward, but you're riding the brake. You can't go forward that way.
Exactly.
You know?
And we don't know our foot's on the brakes.
Yeah, also, exactly. And so we blame outside. That's where
what
you're
I was
going.
just about to say.
I know that.
Same thing.
You don't mind if I read your mind from time to time. Okay,
Well,
good. But please go on.
Well, we all do that all the time. We just don't know we do.
Because there is really one mind. I tell people all the time.
That's what Erwin Schrödinger, the physicist, said, isn't it? The
Yes.
number of minds I've observed in the universe is one, a singular tantum.
There you go.
That's part of quantum physics.
Exactly, including with his cat.
Yeah,
So,
yes.
Exactly. So after people see that they are running a self-sabotage story game, subconscious as it may be, then they become conscious of it through your tutelage, etc. Then how do they begin to uproot the subconscious program that is slowing them down?
Well, I think there are a whole variety of ways we can use. But one might be that I find helpful is one I started using way back decades ago. When I was in graduate school, there were no courses in mind-body medicine and stuff, so I talked to a professor and let him take a directed study so I could just research what was there. And at that time, the only studies showed the mind-body connection where maybe asthma, ulcers, skin
Stomach,
disorders,
right,
and
exactly.
a few things like that.
Right. Psychosomatic medicine,
Right.
Franz Alexander.
It was just a few things that
That's
they
right.
thought was that.
The psychoanalytic literature, actually. Yeah.
And so then when what prompted this afterward was that I was about ready to take comprehensive exams. And about 2 or 3 days before, I was out in my backyard. I had a German Shepherd puppy that was getting out of the fence, and I had to repair the fence. But it was 20 degrees, snowing like crazy, and 20-mile-an-hour wind. And I was out trying to take care of this fence, and I started to get one of those sore throats, which always developed into a horrendous cold, often laryngitis, was very debilitating. And I'd had those from my mid-teens, and I was in my mid-20s at that point. Then suddenly I thought, wait a minute. Why would it be that my mind only affects these 3 or 4 different parts of the body? That doesn't make any sense to me. Duh. You know, how can we say it affects these but not the other part? Why are they so separate?
Right.
It didn't make sense to me. And so I started to ask myself a question. Why might I need this right now? What would it get me out of? Or what would it get for me? Or is there some emotion that I haven't dealt with that maybe is getting expressed in this? Or one I've added since, is there a metaphor that could be expressed in it? And then I've added another one since that time of maybe there's a family belief or a tribal belief that's being manifested here. But anyway, I started asking myself those first 4 questions at that point. And I first thought, why might I need it now? And I thought, maybe I want to get out taking the comprehensive exams. And then I had some reflection on that and realized, no, I really didn't, because I was about 98% prepared. And I didn't want to give up another 3 months of weekends to study again for the next time I could take the exam. So I thought, well, no, it doesn't make sense. I don't really want to get out of that. Then I got down to the part, is there some emotion that maybe I've not dealt with? And with that, when I reflected on that, I suddenly saw my neighbor looking out of her kitchen window, which overlooked my yard, and I felt a pang of guilt. And I thought, oops, I'm onto something here. What's this about? And I started to reflect on that. I said, I think I'm on the track of something. Oh. And so with that, I said, well, what's that about? Then the next thing that came to my mind was how I was projecting onto her. I had promised to do something for her aged father who lived with her, which I was going to do as soon as I took my exams. And I wasn't worried about not doing it. I wasn't trying to get out of it, because when I give my word, I keep it.
Sure.
I'd always done that. Mm-hmm. So I'm not somebody who makes false promises. So I knew it wasn't that. But I had projected onto her that she was looking out the window, seeing me do something in this horrible weather for my dog, when I had not done this thing for her father.
Father, yes.
And you see how irrational that was. It was totally in my own head. And I thought, well, is that the way I want to pay the price for dealing with that, to get sick, so I'd have the trouble of suffering the next few days, maybe not do as well on my exams? And I thought, no way. Then I thought, well, how would I prefer to deal with that differently? And what came to mind, well, as soon as I finish the workout here, I'll just go inside and pick up the phone, and I'll call her and just tell her that I just wanted her to know that I had not forgotten her father, and I was taking exams on Monday or Tuesday, whatever it was. The next day I would do this for her father. And, you know, within about 15 to 20 minutes, half hour at the most, that sore throat had totally gone away. It had always developed into this severe sore throat and cold. It went away totally.
Oh. Wow.
That inspired me to the degree that I've never had another one of those horrendous colds and sore throats since. I've had little beginnings, but I stop and ask myself those questions. I come up with an answer, but I find just getting the answer to my curiosity is never enough.
You've got to go deeper.
I've got to go deeper and see, how would I prefer to tend to that particular emotion or that issue or that secondary gain or that symbolism,
exactly,
that metaphor? How would I prefer to deal with that differently? And then I have to make a firm commitment that I'm going to do it, that I absolutely know I will keep. Not just, oh, gee, I sure would like to do this differently, or I'm tired doing that other, because maybe someday I can be out of that. That won't help. I had to make a firm commitment each time of what I would do differently in a healthier way. And once I did that for my mind to be healthier, my body automatically got healthier.
That
started the whole process.
Becomes a premise of a lot of your life's work, actually.
Exactly.
As a therapist, a psychologist, and of this book.
Exactly.
That is a fabulous story. It shows that one needs to dig deeper down into oneself to uncover the feelings or the belief system or whatever that's hidden underneath, and to examine a projection.
Exactly.
Which you did with her.
Because we need to realize we human beings are all masters of projection. We're all projecting all the time.
That's right.
In a sense, we may not be psychotic as the ones in the hospitals, but we are all hallucinating all the time.
That's true.
We just don't want to recognize it. And we blame it on others. Yeah. Rather than seeing it's my thoughts that's creating this reality for me.
Exactly, exactly. We are speaking with Dr. Henry Grayson for the hour, and we are discussing his book, Use Your Body to Heal Your Mind. And what we're seeing is that there's a flip-flop. This is one time that it's good to flip-flop a bit. Between mind and body and body and mind. They are truly one. You know it. You just expressed a beautiful story, Henry, that captures that idea. And we can either nourish our body more in order to help give a signal. You talk about messaging systems from Candace Pert and others. I think it's so true. When we do something healthy for our body, it sends a message to our mind saying, hello, I am doing good things. And when we think healthy, loving thoughts, then we're giving our body a message that says, I love life and I want to generate more of it.
Well, one thing is that we have to raise the question, too, why so many of us don't do those positive things that we know would help enhance our health. That's what your Boston test
showed, that even though we have a trajectory of health and happiness and healing, we're doing things like, driving with the brakes on.
Why don't I eat healthily, as I say I will? Why don't I get enough sleep, as I say I know I need to? Why don't I do something to bring down stress, such as meditation or breathing or Qigong or whatever it might be? Or why don't I monitor my thoughts? Or why don't I get exercise? And how many of us have vowed that we're going to do that and don't do it very long?
Fall off the bandwagon.
In fact, one thing that always strikes me so profoundly, of all the people who go to a class to learn how to do meditation, you know how many actually practice it ongoingly?
5%.
Exactly. Only 5%. And that tells us that we, as a human condition, have these barriers that we all need to attend to. It's not just running to the doctor to get a quick fix of the symptom. But do we want to keep getting sick? Do we want to keep getting symptoms? Or would we prefer to stay healthy? Would we prefer more happiness? And if so, if I can get back and look at what these barriers are, and I can identify those barriers for me, then we can have a whole different picture for our lives.
I agree with you. And I say to my clients and in my life and in my writing, Henry, this idea, I really think in terms of fields. Not only do I know Lynn McTaggart, and I think so highly of her work on the field, but also before her, the work of Rupert Sheldrake, the work of my good friend, cellular biologist Bruce Lipton. It is inherent in this idea, even the idea from metaphysics of the egregore, this idea that we live inside a field. Werner Erhard used to speak about a cultural listening, a background listening. So these ideas are that many of our actions and reactions and thoughts, while yes, they are ours and self-created on one hand, are also very much a function of the field in which we live and operate. And here we live in the field of a specialized, rarefied field of PRN, but the New York City, and then larger, you keep stepping outward to New York State, and then New England, and then United States in the Western Hemisphere, and then ultimately planet Earth. And we see that we are all part of this kind of planetary field, and we think the thoughts of this field. We think of the thoughts of English speakers. We think, you know what I mean, and the values. And
values and philosophies and behaviors that are accepted or not.
Factoring that in, I think that becomes another place for people to learn not to blame themselves for I am just weak, I am not able, I have no discipline. You know what I mean? That. And to back off that. But how do you speak to people about that?
Well, there are several ways I think we can identify what's behind that.
But that all makes sense to you, I take it.
It totally makes sense, exactly. Because the key part, it never helps to blame ourselves.
No.
That's never useful. The ego mind would like us to do it, so we'll then blame ourselves for blaming ourselves.
Exactly.
And then we can blame ourselves for having blamed ourselves for having blamed ourselves. And that's the way the ego mind goes.
That's right. It doesn't stop.
And so we need to know it's not the voice of truth. It's only the voice that wants to make us miserable and make us unhealthy. It's a voice that wants to keep us separate in our illusion. But I think there are a number of ways we can get to what's behind that. One is to read the body's symptoms, like I said, and ask those questions. That's one way. If I'm reading the language of my body, because the body is really the symbol of separateness. It's what makes you seem like you're a separate person from me.
Exactly.
I had a body that walked into the studio, and you were out there and greeted me with a handshake, and it seemed like it was a separate person I was greeting. But indeed,
don't be thrown by appearances.
That's the key part. We're not really separate. You are me and I am you, and we're all interconnected, as is everybody out there. I get it intellectually, but boy, it's hard for me to really grasp it totally.
That's
really hard.
That's right.
I think that's one way, is to start reading the body language and seeing every little symptom we have as a language that I just need to translate. That it's not an illness that's happening to me, but if I can stop and read that language and translate it and see what it's saying, what is it expressing, that's one way I can begin to get to part of what's unconscious. Because as Candace Pert, that we were quoting before, says the body is your subconscious mind.
Yes.
And I think it takes us to that whole other realm.
Yes.
Then I think there's another way to get to that.
It's a very important point. I agree.
Another way we get to that subconscious mind, I think, is the muscle testing from applied kinesiology helps us. Because it helps us get past what we think is true. Like, for example, somebody will come to me and tell me about a trauma they had in childhood, and they'll tell me they saw a therapist for 10 years and talked about it, and they think, no, that one's all cleared. I worked on that for 10 years. And I can see, no, that one's still manifesting in their lives all over the place. Even though they think it's clear, it's still showing up in the way they're living their lives, the kind of people they're attracting to be with, or the kind of responses they're attracting back from people, or what they're manifesting in the body. And so I think what's important to do then is to go, underneath that again. And so if I can see that, and if I do the muscle testing and say, okay, what's the strength of disturbance you think still remains with you from that trauma? And they'll extend the arm, I'll press down on it, and they'll say, I think it's only a 2 or 3. We test it, and the arm just flops right down. We'll go up, say it's a 4, still weak. Say it's a 5. Say it's greater than a 5, get stronger there. Say it's a 6. We go up and find it's a 9 or a 10.
Mm.
And what tells us is that things like trauma, they affect the limbic system in our brains. And they're not part of the rational brain. And so much of therapy deals with the left and right hemispheres of the rational brain and the symbolic dream.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are all wonderful parts to deal with, but there's another part of the brain we have to deal with that sometimes rules. It's the hijacker on the airplane, as Bruce Lipton talks about it.
Yes.
And it's a part that comes up and just shuts down those frontal lobes in their capacity. It starves the brain from 70% of the oxygen, or up to that, so we can't think clearly.
Interesting.
And so if we don't deal with that other part, it's going to rule. So I'll find out that it's still a 10. Well, that explains totally why they're still having the problem being manifested in relation to those traumas. Then I find that there are ways now that we can actually clear that other than talking, because the neuropsychology shows us that in the brain scan studies, often if a person, not always, but much of the time, a person talking about their trauma just activates the limbic brain and makes it get more active and secrete more stress hormones and actually can be rehearsing the trauma. And so we need to get to something that clears out that information about the trauma, because all it is now is just encoded information, like information encoded in your computer. And so we need to do the equivalent of pressing the delete button on that information. And I find when we can do that, then it changes that part of the brain that gives a signal, danger, 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 and it goes off and the cortisol starts flowing, the adrenaline starts flowing, and we shut down the blood flow to the brain and so on. Okay, if we get that cleared, that doesn't have to happen anymore. When that doesn't happen anymore, then we can use these frontal lobes, the left brain for logic and the right brain for creativity. Then we can use them for ease to monitor our thoughts, to make other decisions in life, to make other choices, because we don't have this hijacker anymore.
So, you're reminding me of the work of Lester Levinson, which became known as the Sedona method with Hal... his name out in Sedona, the Sedona method. He's originally a Jewish guy from Brooklyn. And
maybe he went to Sedona.
Yeah, right, exactly. I keep forgetting his name this moment. I've had him on the show before. And the release technique, which another Jewish guy, but this one from the South Bronx, Larry. Brilliant guys. Lester Levinson was a physicist and an engineer who, in 1953, had a second massive heart attack. Do you know the story?
That part I didn't know about him.
Yeah, and it was because of that second heart attack when the doctor sent him home to die, get your papers in order kind of thing. He said, wait a minute, I may be neurotic, and I've gotten myself into this situation. I am a scientist, and I can get myself out.
Good for him.
And he started to just self-reflect and notice that all of his anger responses were generating more contraction in his body.
Right.
And he said, well, wait a minute, let me try something else. What if I don't have that anger thought? Or if I release the anger thought, then his body relaxed. And then slowly and surely, instead of dying in 3 weeks, he lived. That was in 53. He died in 1993. He lived he doubled his lifespan.
Sure, I totally believe it.
And he became, he's been equated in some ways, or I should say Eckhart Tolle has been equated with him as being a kind of an enlightened being who he used to sit on the on the benches of Central Park listening to the birds sing, just like Eckhart Tolle did in Cambridge or whatever,
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm just bringing that up because there's an entire, I mean, we use the words these days, technology, a method of going into pain and releasing it.
Yeah.
And letting go, because we realize that the reasons that we are maintaining it is usually for approval or a sense of security or safety or, something of the sort.
Because I think that there are a variety of ways that can work. And some will work better for one issue, some for another issue, one person versus another person. And so I think you're listing one that's a very powerful one, is the release technique.
Yeah.
I think that another is one that came along is bilateral stimulation of the brain that you can use, whether it's moving the eyes back and forth or whether it's stimulating opposite sides of the body.
You mean like EFT and TFT?
No, this would be like EMDR.
EMDR, right.
And then when you get into EFT, which is really stimulating energy meridians.
Indeed.
And so the basic idea in the Chinese system of acupuncture is that there are these meridians of energy flowing through the body, which are connected with different organs.
I'm an acupuncturist.
Okay. And then there's one, each organ has a negative emotion associated with it.
Exactly.
And then the opposite, positive
and
emotion.
Positive, sure.
But when you stimulate that meridian, it seems to diminish the negative emotion and allow the positive to come in naturally. And so while we've learned a lot from the acupuncture system, which is very powerful and a long history, we can add another boost to it with consciousness. Because a lot of people that go in for acupuncture just lie there and let it be done to them, and they get benefits, which is great.
Sure.
But they can get some more benefits if they'll add intention about what it's doing. And I think that's where things like the EFT and the thought field therapy have a version of adapted
Take it another step.
Called the EFTA, where you can just touch the spots, state what emotion you're releasing, and then breathe to assimilate it and access it. I find that works even more powerfully. And it's more reflective, brings up other associative things that need to be cleared, not just a quick technique thing.
Do you have a client that you've used this on that comes to mind that you could give us an example of?
Oh, I've used it with so many different kinds.
Yes, I imagine.
But
I'm wondering if there's a particular story that maybe you discuss in the book, or
one dramatic one comes to me right now.
Sure.
Is that when I just first learned this stuff, back in the 90s, I'd learned applied kinesiology and muscle testing, and I'd learned just thought field therapy, which was the original form of the meridian stimulation work, developed by Roger Callahan in California. And I had a woman who's had anxiety reactions all of her life. And she came in, she'd been through a lot of other therapy, and since I'd studied most of the forms of psychotherapy and practiced them, I was using everything I knew, and nothing was working. And one day she came in and said, Henry...
You've used hypnotherapy, you're familiar with Milton Erickson, you're familiar with NLP.
And I was using cognitive therapy, and I was using some behavioral approach, and I was using some visualization, and I was using a whole variety of things. Gestalt, I've been trained in that, practiced that, and nothing was working. And so one day she came in and she said, and she's the one that led me with this. It was the beginning of my opening up more possibilities. She says, Henry, I've had this all my life. I think this comes from a past life. I thought, I don't know if past lives are literal or a metaphor, and I don't really care. All it is encoding some information anyway, and it's maybe a way of classifying information. So I'm not there to debate with her whether there's such a thing or not. But I said, why don't we just muscle test and see if that's so? And we did some muscle testing and said, yes, it does come from a past life. It doesn't. Strong on the yes, it does. Then I said, there's one past life trauma influence, and I pushed her arm. It was strong. There are 2 past life traumas. It was strong. 3 past life traumas. It was strong. 4 past life traumas. It got weak. So we knew it was 3 different ones. So we did a process from the thought field therapy, one of the algorithms for trauma, which I find still to this day is what works best for pre-verbal traumas, ones that are prior to us having language, because it does meridian stimulation, and it also does bilateral stimulation in it, as well as intentionality combined with it. But anyway, I did rounds of that with her on each of those traumas. She came back the next week, just glowing, and she says, first time in my life, I've been free of anxiety. I can't believe it. Now, most people, it's not quite that dramatic. Most people have several tentacles to the octopus that have to be attended to. And I don't want to set false hope for people. If they do it once, they think they're a failure. Because it's not that. But she's an example that demonstrates, since that was the main issue that remained for her, we took care of that, then the major shift occurred.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Because of what we understand with neural pathways and the cutting of those pathways relative to emotions, obsession, what have you, compulsions, we would see tentacles. So for you to make such a, pardon the expression, surgical incision, metaphorically, into helping her.
Not with a scalp.
No, not at all, but with the mind in helping her sort of free herself, extracting that anxiety pattern in her being. I think also, perhaps, just as I'm listening, it sounds like she had a hard time owning up to the presence of the anxiety as something self-caused. But if she could locate that anxiety in a past life or two or three, as it was proved out, then she could breathe more deeply in the present, freeing herself up from a sense of self-blame, and then more freely let it go.
Because what she did as she focused on it was with a strong intention to release that.
Yes, exactly.
And what I think about these methods is that they're really kind of a boost to consciousness.
Yes.
And the rituals are for the purpose of focusing consciousness.
Exactly.
And so while there's some benefit from stimulating those energy meridians, I think a big part is a ritual to focus conscious intent too.
That's right. Exactly. You know, honestly, I was probably one of the first in New York to be using acupuncture along with my practice in psychotherapy back in the early 80s.
Wow.
Because I really studied acupuncture not to stick needles in people, quite honestly, but because I wanted their understanding of body's energetics and the relation to the emotions, the organ relationship, like you're talking about the five-element theory, basically. And so I just started, pardon the expression, needling around, poking around, you know. And I really sort of evolved my own system of doing psychotherapy using acupuncture as its bedfellow, if you will. You know, it was very interesting. So it's a pleasure to hear. I loved when TFT and EFT started coming onto the scene because I saw that other people were involved in now what is called energy psychology, which I think is a laudable field.
Yeah,
you know, it really is.
I'm really glad it's spreading.
Yeah, it really is. And you've been involved in helping that spread, and I'm really pleased. You told a story in here, Henry, about knowing a certain man who, I think it was his father, was a Qigong master. And he was able to create a field around him of protection. And he was able to do things that we in the West, except for what we refer to as miracles, wouldn't really get. You also made reference to the two people, one in India, one in Germany. I know about these two through Gabriel Cousins in his book, Spiritual Nutrition, who have not really been eating what we would call food or even drinking much water. And yet they are alive and well. So you're talking about powers of consciousness that go far beyond our ordinary thinking. And could you comment on that? Because I think that's we only have a few more minutes. I'd love for people to get that download. Well, you're not, obviously, our diet, our sleeping patterns, our exercise, our attitude. I always talk about attitude. I think that is like the substratum of all. But all of these things are so important. And part of that is, you know, what we can do with our minds to heal our body. Could you?
Well, I think what it is.
Tell the story, if you would, also.
Well, the story, rather with the shortage of time, maybe I won't limit to that, but I think what is really happening is that we all think we're powerless. In our illusion of separateness, we think we're powerless. And we also think that the physical reality world is what's real. We believe in the Newtonian science that the only thing that's real is what you can experience with your five senses and measure it. Then quantum physics comes along, and it's much more akin to worldwide spiritual wisdom that says that which is real is more at an invisible level. And so if we think about the body, it's actually 99.999% empty space, because now it's comprised of atoms, right? And what is an atom?
Are you calling me empty?
I hope so.
It's true.
I hope so.
Yes.
Empty of the illusions.
Yeah,
or
really.
Something else. That kind of emptiness.
Yes, I'm just enjoying you, that's all.
You crush an atom now. You find it's not that electron and proton and neutron. We thought it had some matter there.
Yes.
And now they show there's nothing there but a spark of energy.
It's a matter of nothing.
It's a matter of nothing. Yes. It's no thing.
Right.
And if our bodies are comprised of that, they're just, as a physicist put it, just a tendency to exist. And it doesn't really exist. And before a quanta pops into slower vibration, it's just pops right out, and another one comes in. And so, therefore, our bodies are not etched in stone, so to speak, is the key part.
Yes.
We need to change our whole worldview about what is real.
Yes.
And if we see that we're not locked into this, we can change it because it really is just there, part of consciousness and energy.
Yes. Exactly. So, in other words, the directed Qigong master takes his Qi, forms an intent, and goes for it, and can become as light as emptiness, to, in other words, if someone is aggressing, I know from Tai Chi, which I've been doing forever, you're receiving the energy. It's not forming resistance. You let go of resistance.
Right.
So as a metaphor, that's really important for our lives. You receive as a gift, and you can let it go if you don't want it, like I was saying about what we receive from our parents, or you can receive it, and then in Tai Chi, we use it back against the person, so they'll get discouraged from using it again. Yeah. But no, I think this is a very important point that you're making, Henry, in the book about the focalizing of Qi, and that we are much bigger than we have any idea about, but are we willing to stand up to the plate and take ourselves to the next level, and not just sort of sell out to the mediocre headset that says, I can't do this. Let others do this. I know. So, that's an issue. It's an issue. People just sort of sell out, if you will, and not rise to the higher occasion.
Our littleness and believe
that's right.
That's who and what we are.
Exactly.
Rather than recognizing who we are as the true nature that is full of immense power, and that probably is the thing we're most afraid of.
Exactly.
We're
As that wonderful quote
and we're afraid of
Mandela.
Love. Yeah. And we're afraid of love.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe they're our two greatest fears, as much as we seek for both.
Oh, God. Wise words, Henry Grayson. Wise words. Thank you. Thank you so much for being a guest on today's show.
It's great being with you on the show.
What a
Love
pleasure.
the dialogue with you.
Me too. God. And this was long in coming, despite
time, huh?
our activity on a certain board, and which is wonderful in itself, but we didn't have a chance to really connect.
That's right.
And so I'm grateful for this opportunity.
Yes, me too.
Good.
Me too.
Your website for people to find out more about your work?
It's just henrygrayson.com.
That's easy. Okay.
henrygrayson.com.
Very good. Very good. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. Go to our website at www.abetterworld.tv and join the newsletter if you haven't already. I'm very glad that you are joining us again today. Stay tuned for tomorrow night. We'll be speaking about total biology with Isabel Benares, who I've had on this show and the TV show a number of times. And we had a whole series of total biology workshops, which, by the way, if you don't know about it, I brought this to New York about 7 or 8 years ago. And it's a wholly integrated mind-body understanding, first based on the work of Dr. Hammer of the German New Medicine, and then further refined by a Moroccan-born Kabbalist, MD, Ph.D., Dr. Claude Sabah. It's brilliant work, and it gets to the emotional conflict underneath somatic illness.
All
so,
right.
On that note, that's Tuesday night, and Wednesday we have another show on Blog Talk Radio at 6 o'clock. Join us for that as well. Thanks so much for joining us. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.
This is PRN for the Progressive Radio Network.
Are computers making us mutants?
How does the Milky Way fit inside your brain?
Peter, you there?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Hello? Yeah.
Gary, I'm just doing a sound test with Peter right now on Skype. Peter, could you count to 10, please?
Sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
All right, beautiful. You seem loud and clear. If we do have any problems, I will tell you and we'll just resume on the phone, but it doesn't look like we will have any. The interview should start, the show will start in 3 minutes. So if you could just please hang tight and mute your mic until Gary introduces you on the show.
Okay.
All right, thank you so much.
Sure.
Gary, we're good to go on in 2.5 minutes.
Consciousness, just to name a few. Listen and call in Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, or download the podcast from the archives at prn.fm. The Progressive